I just want to start by saying how great it is to be home. We're lucky, people are lucky in general to have more than one home, and we Jewish people in particular to have more than one place to call our own. But to come back and be with my family and my Temple Sinai family feels so good after a really fascinating and wide-ranging 6 months. I'm sure that the time that I've been away is going to, there's so many different things to talk about and to tell and to consider and to reflect on. So I'm sure that I'll be referring to things connected to my sabbatical for a long period of time. But I'm really excited to have the opportunity tonight to talk just a little bit, to give an initial sense. I want to share a couple of experiences with you. I actually chose just a very small number of photos and one very short video because it's more tonight about the perspective and the feeling that it gave me to have this amazing experience with the support of you and Temple, to have this opportunity to go and contribute in a different way and see myself and our Jewish life in a different way is just an amazing privilege. So I certainly can't thank the leadership of Temple and the professional staff, my colleagues here at Temple, possibly enough for making it possible for me to have this experience and for me to have the opportunity tonight to share initially a piece of it with you. And I really look forward to many more opportunities of talking about what happened in large ways and in small ways. But really the experience as a whole comes down to one of the most told Jewish jokes that I won't be telling anymore. And that joke is, you probably all know it, how do you describe every Jewish holiday? And the answer is, you can say it with me if you know, they tried to kill us, we're still here, let's eat. Right? And often, that's a joke that people will say that is all Jewish holidays. And in many ways, we often relate to it as if that is the quintessential Jewish story. And the central learning that I have from this time is that, of course, all humor is based on truth. So there is some experience we have where we feel like that kind of approach is definitely a story of the Jewish people. But I think the main thing that I experienced on this time away was that that's not the only Jewish story. That's not the main Jewish story. In fact, there really is no one primary Jewish story. And that one of my real motivations for me as a person and as a rabbi and for us as a community is to use the time I had and the experience that I've had for us to affirm and collect and tell a much greater variety of Jewish stories in the way that we live as a community. Because the things that I experienced reminded me so much about the importance of growth. And that part of growth comes with having experiences that challenge the kind of assumptions and stories that we tend to operate with every day. So before I wake the computer up and start with a small number of pictures that we're going to use to sort of amplify some of the story, I want to start before the pictures. Because when I was starting this sabbatical and planning this sabbatical, I decided to try to have a number of different, really new experiences and Jewish experiences, which some of the places weren't very Jewish, but I am. So they become an important Jewish experience for the Jewish person who's there. But in the plans, there were really two different main elements of the sabbatical. The first piece of it was about traveling to places that I haven't been or that I'd only been once before, and seeing what it meant to be in those places and to have those experiences. The first one of those was India, which I'll be talking about my time in India tonight, and about my hopes that in January of 2020, that a whole bunch of us here at Temple Sinai and I will be traveling together to India. I really think that will be an exciting and worthy thing to do, and I'll begin to tell you tonight exactly why. After that, I had the privilege of going back with Joan to Ghana, and we'll talk a little bit about that trip, which is where this tie comes from. And no, I won't only be wearing these ties, having been away for 6 months, but I do want to talk a little bit about the month put together that I spent in India and then in Ghana. And then after a brief time here back in Canada, luckily for me, it turns out fall in Canada is in February, and winter was in April while I was in Israel. But the last part of the 3.5 months at the end of my sabbatical, the second half of it, if you will, was spent in Israel, having experiences that were really different and unique, and very exciting, and that challenged me especially about broadening the kind of stories about Israel that we have the opportunity to tell. But before I did any of that traveling, I had committed, before I left Temple Sinai on December the 17th, that while I was in Israel, I was going to be doing a whole bunch of voluntary teaching while I was there. The teaching that I did was primarily to teenage Israelis, Israelis who were 17, 18, 19 years old, which meant that that teaching was done in Hebrew. The teaching part in Hebrew was actually much more easy than the listening part in Hebrew. Because it turns out that Israeli 18-year-olds mumble to the same degree in Hebrew that Canadian 18-year-olds mumble in English. So it was a bit of a challenge, not just to my Hebrew. There was one young man, in fact, who I taught Joan was there for one of the sessions, and it helped me afterward that she affirmed, no, he didn't say one word that was understandable in that entire time, so it wasn't only me. However, so during the first month of my sabbatical, a small part of which I spent here in Toronto and a bunch of which I spent visiting my parents in the States, because thank God I'm lucky enough to still have parents in this world, and I don't get to be a good son that often because we live very far apart. But during that month, I took Hebrew lessons over the internet. I do spend a good part of my time reading in Hebrew. I feel good about working hard at having good Hebrew skills. But to be honest, I think had I not done that month of learning with an amazing organization that Joan introduced me to, I guess about 12 years ago when she was studying there, called Ulpan Or, O-R, they have become, from a little operation that we met, the world's leader in spoken Hebrew teaching and in teaching Hebrew over the internet. So during the first month of my sabbatical, I spent 8-hour-long sessions, 2 of them with a lovely young man in Jerusalem and 6 with a young woman who's a psychologist in Tel Aviv, talking in Hebrew. and doing homework and working on my skills. Because it reminded me that, especially in the things that some of us may be good at, whatever they may be, we can always get better. And it's tempting in life to take something that we already do at an okay level and to say, well, I guess it's okay. And it was, but I feel really lucky that I made this commitment to sort of step in water that was a little deep for me. In Hebrew, because otherwise I wouldn't have been motivated to take the Hebrew lessons, and it would have been a loss for me not to take the time to actually learn and grow in that area. And it was a really interesting experience, and I felt it was really helpful to me in doing some of the things that I'm going to be able to help you to talk about tonight. So after that, I came back here to Toronto for a day and a half. Not exaggerating, and then got on a plane and went through Amsterdam to India. Most of our travel that we do in Israel here at Temple Sinai is with a wonderful travel company in Israel called Dod Educational Expeditions that has a number of different North American partners that we deal with as well. And Dot does worldwide Jewish travel, and so what I participated in was a familiarization trip, or as they called it, a fam trip, which I can tell you, first of all, does not stand for famished. We ate, and we ate a lot, and the food was fantastic. However, fam stands for familiarization. And what that means, that the trip that we did with the group that I traveled with, which was mostly a bunch of other Reform rabbis and myself, was a 12-day trip that we did in 8.5 days. Because it really was an opportunity for me, on behalf of Temple, to say, not only I'd always had an interest in going to India, which I did, but is this something I thought there was value in doing? And I really did find it to be quite amazing to go. And I'm excited that hopefully a year and a half from now, that we will have the opportunity to travel, a bus full of people from our community to go together to India. So why is that? So I have the first few pictures I want to show you are pictures from India that are not of the Taj Mahal. Here we go. That is definitely not the Taj Mahal. Okay? Now, let me just, because I can turn around, let me do this. Now, where did we go in India? In order to see Jewish history in India, the three main places one has to go is to New Delhi, well, Delhi, but primarily New Delhi, to Cochin, and to Mumbai. Okay, now New Delhi these are all toward the west of India. And it turns out, by the way, that there's a special link between India and Canada that you probably didn't know about. The time change from Toronto to Western India is 10.5 hours. So apparently anyone with Newfie family should definitely go on this trip. I didn't know anybody else had half an hour except Newfoundland. New Delhi is up in the north, Mumbai is in the middle, and Cochin is way in the south. And in fact, before we went to New Delhi and then took the bus to see the Taj Mahal in Agra, and then took a train to Jaipur, and then flew to the south. And when we were at the Taj Mahal, and I knew we were taking a train and then a plane, and I said to the people who organized the tour, is it possible to drive from here to Cochin in the south of India? And they said yes. And I said, how long would that take? And they said 3.5 days. So it's a reminder that there is no such thing. Taking a trip to India is like taking a trip to Africa or a trip to Europe and seeing the whole thing. It's impossible. And in fact, one of the pictures I'm not showing you, I took a picture of the money. Because in one place, on the currency in India, there's a place on each bill where they have the same phrase, I don't remember what the phrase is, in India's 15 official languages. Right, so that already that's not dialects, that's languages. Right? So that gives you an idea of that there are lots of different ways to go to India. The trip that I went on, and that I hope Temple can go on as a community, is a trip to really see the Jewish experience in India. And in India, of all places, the story of they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat, is completely false. It's not the case. The Jews of India were not persecuted. It is of course a complex country that's mostly 80% Hindu and 20% Muslim in its current formulation. When there was a large Jewish community in India, that was 50,000 Jews at its height, of a country that now has 1.2 billion citizens. And of the 1.2 billion citizens that they have there, now 4,500 are Jews. Of those 4,500, 4,000 live in Mumbai, and 500 live absolutely everywhere else. It was really quite an interesting trip, and the pictures I want to show you are symbolic. Now, this is a picture that I took. I don't think it's on Jew Street. I think it's around the corner from Jew Street. A number of the cities there have a street called Jew Street, which is where the Jews used to live, or where they still do. So this is in Cochin, which is in the southern part of India. Okay, so look at the picture. What do you see? You see English, as well as the part, the bottom right, that's local languages, right? This is in a reasonably touristy area, so it's mostly in English. And what are you looking at? What kind of store is this? Right, it looks to me, he said, ruining the video being taken out tonight for people who couldn't come. It looks like a place with plants and tropical fish. Right? It is that, but I'm going to go through 4 pictures. We're going to walk into the aquarium store. Okay? These pictures, I'm just getting out of the way for those who need to see that. We're going to walk into the aquarium store. So there's on the way in. And there we are with our aquaria and cages. There we are going through the back door. Good, one too many. Sorry, wrong thing. There we go. And that, as you see in the back, is the ark. Okay? The back of the fish store is a synagogue. Right? And the only way into the synagogue is through the tropical fish aisle. Right, is into them. And I shared these pictures because it's not what you're going to see. It's not, but it to me was very symbolic of how it felt there. Especially for Jews who are from the northern part of the Western Hemisphere, who live in a place that is surrounded by Christianity and its history. Most of us in families that come from places where Jews were surrounded either by a Christian civilization or by a Muslim civilization. And that's not the Indian story. So you think you're walking into one place, and you find yourself entirely in another. And throughout India, in the opportunity to see these places where the Jews still live, or where they have lived, what it did was challenge the way I'm used to, just talking about my own personal experience, the way I'm used to thinking about my expectations and my identity. For example, there are now about 70,000 Indian Jews from India, in Israel. That community of 70,000 is what now is from the 45,000 primarily, who came from India to Israel, primarily in the 1950s. Why did they come? Because they were Zionists. India was sad to see them go. They went by choice. To date, of all of the different aliyahs, of all of the different groups that have made aliyah to Israel, right? All the different places that people come from, the only group that ever paid for their own aliyah were the Jews of India. Why? Because when they were well ensconced, they were respected, they were comfortable, but they finally had a place of their own and they wanted to go. But it is, and as important, as exciting as it is to see India, and also as a Jew to think about what it would be like to be surrounded by Hinduism and its history instead of by Christianity or Islam, is also a fascinating thing to think about, and was a really interesting experience. And of course, very important, which we did and we would do as a group, was to meet and talk to the Jewish community of Mumbai, who are still there, to see what their experience is and what it feels like for them, because there are so many different Jewish stories, and every time we experience a different one, I think it enriches our own. I'll tell you the story that reminded me. There's so much to talk about and to teach and to learn. I've only scratched the surface. We had a wonderful guide whose name was Naomi Girard. Temple Sinai has members from India who are Naomi and Sion Girard, which was an interesting coincidence. We tried, couldn't find a direct link between them. One thing that I learned there, what now is India was originally India and Pakistan. And most of you know this, right? And that when it became independent, the area that was primarily Hindu became India. And the areas that were primarily Muslim became Pakistan on the west side of India, and East Pakistan on the east side of India was one country called Pakistan with two locations. Okay? Eventually, East Pakistan broke away from the rest of Pakistan and became what we now call Bangladesh. And when they did, they turned to the Indian military for support in them having the opportunity to be independent. So a whole unit of the Indian military, led by one of the Indian military generals, supported East Pakistan in becoming the independent country of Bangladesh. Why do we care, and why am I telling you? Because the general who helped East Pakistan become Bangladesh was General Cohen. He was in fact a Jewish general in the Indian army who was the key figure in this piece of world evolution. And that's even after most Jews had already left India to go to Israel. And it shows how incredibly well accepted and part of a society in a way that didn't involve any assimilation the Jewish community of India was. Again, it's just a little tidbit of information, but so many different things to see, so many different things to learn. And an opportunity not only to meet an amazing country, a place that is an absolute glory for vegetarians or people like me who only eat kosher meat and so end up being functional vegetarians a lot of the time. Because Hindus are primarily vegetarian, although there are small Hindu groups who are not. But so the food was wonderful. The water was safe. The hotels were lovely, and it was really a wonderful experience, and one that I'm happy to talk more about at other times. But I went just because I wanted to see, and I really said, this is a place where just the act of coming here, and not just and a trip where you just go see India, I would also love to do. That would be fascinating. But a trip to see the Jewish background of India is a particular kind of trip that I think is really potentially interesting, especially for a big multicultural synagogue in the most multicultural city in the world. So that's really a little bit of the story about, that's the wrong button. There we go. Okay, we already entered the store, right? Okay, so I had the privilege of going back to Ghana, where my wife Joan, who's here in the back, where I was with Joan in Ghana 6 years ago, right? It was 6 years ago, wasn't it? 2012. When having spent time there before, as many of you know, because she's spoken about it a number of times here at Temple, she went and volunteered her special education experience and skills in Ghana in 2011, and she and two teachers there, that's the two people standing with her there in the picture, Michael and Priscilla, decided that seeing that students didn't have special needs students when they were old enough not to be students anymore, had very, very few, if any, opportunities to live independently, work, etc. And that they ought to have these opportunities. And when I was there with Joan in 2012, it was amazing watching her purchase a piece of land, which happened literally when we were about to get in the car to go back down to the capital city to go to the airport to leave, as well as to temporarily lease a piece of land, which involved the transfer of a goat hand to hand at the time, and certain other rituals. And at the time, aside from the fact that there were no group homes in sub-Saharan Africa at all, it was amazing watching Joan try to navigate this village culture in Ghana that respected and appreciated her because she'd been there for a couple of months the year before. And watching her try to help them get their heads around an amazing and humane idea that was, at the time, completely countercultural. The idea that a village, which is a pretty poor village, would invest in and would welcome an opportunity to give opportunity to people who were less fortunate in this way. And it was clear 6 years ago that there was a long physical journey to creating such a place and a long cultural journey to helping this find its place where she was. I felt very lucky that she took me there and gave me the opportunity to see some of these things. That is